No, Steve, thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's a very rare opportunity for the fellows to speak directly to you when we're up and down the country at our busy screening events. We don't often get time to tell you and give you feedback about these exciting projects that we are undertaking. So thank you, Steve, for providing me with that opportunity. I'd like to tell you about two projects that I'm currently involved with cardiac risk in the young, and they really centre from the most recent review from the UK National Screening Committee. As you know, in 2015, in their review, they did not recommend screening of young individuals for sudden cardiac death. And as Professor Sharma alluded to, there were concerns from the authors citing the low perceived incidence or frequency of sudden cardiac death, but also the poor performance of proposed screening tools. So my two projects are going to look at these individually. And the first one I want to tell you about is the project looking at the low frequency or incidence of sudden cardiac death. What do we mean by this? Well, we need to know two things. We need to know the number of young individuals who experience a sudden cardiac death, or, as I'll tell you why it's important, a sudden cardiac arrest per year. We also need to know the number of individuals within our study population who are at risk each year. In the National Screening Committee review, they cited a figure of 1 in 300,000 individuals. That figure, which we think is very misleading, it's an important figure because screening policies are often determined by these estimates of incidence, okay? So how frequent the event occurs that you're looking at. A quick review of the current data, and this, as you say, well, a lot of it is taken from athletes. We know that sudden cardiac death is the leading cause of non-accidental death in young athletes. And when we look at all of the studies available to date that have looked at the incidence of sudden cardiac death, there is a huge variation in the figures given. That can be from, as I said with the figure before, of 1 in 300,000 a year, to the more common 1 in 22,000 a year. And we at CRI think it's closer to that number. We think it's more common than the literature tells us. Why is there so much variation? Well, it's all about the methodology being used by the authors. The majority of studies have used case identification methods, including internet searches. They are looking at media reports and insurance claims. And I hope you can understand that that's going to seriously underestimate the number of new individuals per year that are being found. We also need to make sure that we're including survivors of sudden cardiac arrest when we're thinking about adverse events. A lot of studies only look at sudden cardiac death, and that's going to, again, seriously underestimate the at-risk population. When we look at the studies with higher methodological quality, an estimate of 1 in 50,000 per year is given, but we do think it's more common than that. And that's really going to be the primary objective of my first study, which is going to define the frequency of sudden cardiac death and sudden cardiac arrest in a very large population of previously screened young individuals. We're also going to look at the performance of the screening tests that we use, i.e. the health questionnaire and the ECG. So, as I said, those are the two things we need to know to get our frequency rate. How are we going to know the number of individuals within our study population? Well, that's actually the easy bit. Since 2007, a huge database has been formed from cardiac risk in the young. From 2007 to the current day, that's about 150,000 individuals that have been screened by cardiac risk in the young. This database provides us with a very unique opportunity to evaluate a well-defined population. So we've got all of the demographics of those individuals. What about the new individuals who experience sudden cardiac death? This is going to be, we've recently had a data sharing agreement with NHS Digital. The NHS Digital are in control of national databases that are going to tell us who has suffered a sudden cardiac death and who has suffered a sudden cardiac arrest, both in hospital and out of hospital. And you can see that that's going to be much more accurate than merely going on the internet and looking for media reports. Not only that, but the NHS Digital are going to give us an anonymised list of who has been diagnosed with a cardiac condition since their screen, and also who has undergone an intervention to modify their risk of sudden cardiac death. What about assessing the performance of the tests that we're using? To date, you've already heard today some of the fantastic work that's come from cardiac risk in the young supported research, but the majority of that work has centered on the positive findings. So individuals that have an abnormal health questionnaire or have an abnormal ECG. And they represent, of the entire database, about 10% of individuals. This study is going to be unique in that it's going to provide us with a real good opportunity to have a look at the 90%, so those that had normal findings. And as Professor Sharma said, we recognize that we will not identify every single individual with a cardiac condition associated with risk. With this study, we will be able to find out who, since their screening, has tragically had an event such as sudden cardiac death or a cardiac arrest. We're also going to be in the unique opportunity to evaluate those that have gone on with normal ECG or health questionnaire findings to later develop a condition associated with sudden cardiac death. So that's again one of the real strengths of this study. What impact could this have not only on the screening, on our screening protocol within cardiac risk in the young, but the wider screening protocol adopted by screening providers worldwide? Remember, currently the database is 150,000. In 10 years' time, that number will grow to about 500,000. And we will also have 10 more years of follow-up. So although the impact of this study will be good now, in 10 years' time, the studies that come forward will be even further reaching. So this really is just the beginning. This study will provide the most comprehensive study on cardiac screening to date. It's going to provide us with the most accurate estimate of sudden cardiac death and sudden cardiac arrest incidence to date. And that is clearly relevant to screening policies, national screening committees in this country, and screening committees worldwide. As I said, the second objective is going to look at the performance of the screening tools that we adopt. That's going to guide us on who we screen, when we screen them, which tests we should be using, but also how often we should be screening. By doing so, we are going to be in a position where we can optimize the screening protocol that we use. In doing so, we hope to screen a larger number of individuals for the same or a reduced cost. And in doing so, we hope to identify a greater number of individuals who are at risk, and that has to be the ultimate aim. The second study I want to tell you about, we are in the process of evaluating a new health questionnaire that's been designed in Canada, and we want to compare the Canadian health questionnaire with our current practice, which is our online questionnaire with an on-site physician. So this again is going to be looking at the performance of the screening tools used. As Professor Sharma told us in the last talk, a lot of work that's been supported by cardiac risk in the young research has focused on the 12-lead ECG. This has seen the development of contemporary ECG criteria that has driven the rates of false positives down. But what about the health questionnaire? This is an example of a health questionnaire that I may see when I'm in Scotland, as I will be this weekend. And I want you to appreciate the volume of information on this questionnaire. This individual has told me that they have fainted. They've told me that they've got dizzy turns. They've told me that they get palpitations, so a racing heartbeat. And they also tell me that they get chest pain from now and again. It can take a tremendous amount of time to interpret these symptoms. How I interpret symptoms is going to be different from how Professor Mary Shepherd will, how Sabir will, Professor Sharma, and Dr. Papadakis. We all interpret symptoms differently, and that's challenging, okay? 33% of our questionnaires will come back with symptoms declared on them. And it's for that reason that we need a physician on site to be able to differentiate what is a benign symptom from what is more pathological and warrants a secondary evaluation. That takes time, and it takes a physician to be there on site. We know that symptoms are generally poor predictors of cardiac disease. But does that mean that we should completely ignore them? I would say no. We recognise that there are limitations of the health questionnaire. We recognise that 80% of individuals that tragically experience a sudden cardiac death are asymptomatic. But don't forget that 20%, all right? We know that certain features on the health questionnaire are better predictors of disease, one of which, and Michael alluded to that with his SADS data, is blackout, and also blackout whilst exercising. That really is a red flag for us. We also know, as Michael said, that family history of sudden cardiac death or of inherited cardiac conditions is incredibly important. We also recognise that certain conditions associated with sudden cardiac death will manifest with symptoms but having a normal 12-lead ECG. There's an example of a few of them. Ultimately, although we recognise the health questionnaire to be a poor predictor of disease, we also recognise that every single individual that we screen must be provided with a platform to declare symptoms and family history. So the health questionnaire is here to stay. The Canadian Novel Health Questionnaire is different in that it provides us with an objective scoring process, so a unique scoring system. They developed their questions by having a look in the literature and seeing what symptoms best predict disease. And the one which best predicts disease is blackout, so loss of consciousness, particularly in exercise. And the questionnaire is weighted towards that symptom. Of the 3 questions, looking at blackout, palpitations, and breathlessness, there is a score of 0 to 7. And if you score 7 points, then that is considered positive, and you should therefore, irrespective of the finding of your ECG, be referred for secondary evaluation. The really important bit to stress here is that this questionnaire has been designed to be delivered without an on-site physician. It's been designed to be delivered without an examination, and that's very important when we think about what future models can come from this, which we'll come to a little later. Here's an example. So the cardiac risk in the young, when we ask about fainting or losing consciousness, that's what we've got at the top here. So we ask them, have you experienced a fainting episode during exercise, following exercise, or unrelated to exercise? And you can circle yes or no for that. And there's also a free text box to expand. How this questionnaire differs is that it gives you an objective score. So if you have passed out, for example, that will score you 4 points. If it was within exercise, that's going to score you 3. All right, so that would be a positive score. And as I said, irrespective of you having a normal ECG, that would warrant a secondary referral or a secondary evaluation. The objectives of this study, we're going to compare the referral rate generated from the CRY questionnaire with an on-site physician review, and compare that to the novel health questionnaire. If they perform equally, then we need to start thinking about what models of screening an objective scoring questionnaire could provide us. These are, I really want to stress that we talk about these are currently options. These are not things that we're thinking about implementing immediately if they perform equally, but it's really just to get our minds thinking about how this could improve our cardiac screening protocol. Current practice, a young individual performs what is now the online health questionnaire. They then attend their screen, and remember that can be weeks to months later. They undergo assessment with their ECG, and at that time they see one of the cardiac risk in the young fellows. And as I said, I've separated these 2 boxes because it really does take 2, 3, 4 times the amount of time to interpret symptoms as it does an ECG. Okay? Once they've interpreted the symptoms, the family history, and the ECG, a screening outcome is given. So how could this change if we or other screening providers were to use this novel Canadian health questionnaire? Let's first think about what we could do in the context of a positive score. Ordinarily, that individual will wait some weeks or a month or so to see the doctor at their cardiac screen where they'd have their ECG beforehand. But if we highlight disease, or if we highlight a positive health questionnaire with, immediately, then do we not have an opportunity to act earlier? This could trigger a telephone consultation with a doctor, and it could trigger a direct referral to the GP or cardiology services without having to wait for their cardiac risk in the young screen. Okay, so we are given an opportunity to flag individuals at potential risk earlier. The direct referral itself has the potential for us to identify disease earlier, identify risk of sudden cardiac death earlier, and initiate risk-modifying therapy. The individuals that may go directly to secondary evaluation also provides more people to undergo routine screening. So we may have the opportunity to screen a larger amount or a greater number of individuals at the same cost. So we're making our protocol more cost effective. What about for a negative score on the novel health questionnaire? Well, these individuals would go through to their screening event, they'd have their ECG, and by having an objective measure of symptoms, then we completely remove or certainly minimize the amount of time required in the consultation process. If you take out that 6-minute period and apply that to, we said 33% of the individuals, so let's say if we see 100 individuals in a day, 30 of those individuals are going to require a 6-7 minute consultation. This objective questionnaire has the potential to remove that and save a significant amount of time on the screening day. We can therefore screen a greater number of individuals. We can identify more risk and again make this protocol more cost effective. If you don't need an on-site physician to review the questionnaire, given that they had a negative score, then some may start thinking about whether or not you need a physician on-site to review the ECG. This may, way in the future, lead to remote screening centres where a cardiac risk in the young fellow or a research fellow can go through ECGs of individuals that have no symptoms or family history. Okay? And the number of ECGs, the number of screening outcomes that you could generate in a day would far exceed that you would in our current practice to date. So that, again, is another potential option that this novel questionnaire could give us or other screening providers worldwide the opportunity moving forward. The cardiac risk in the young machine is doing an incredible job at the moment. They're screening up to 30,000 individuals a day, but we believe that we can make constant improvements to the protocols that we adopt. That's not going to happen without research. We are aiming to screen a greater number of individuals at a reduced cost and therefore widening the scope further. On behalf of all of the fellows, so the other 9 that can't be here today, I really do want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be involved in this really, really exciting research. Thank you very much.